was a barbaric attack at Vaughan Foods in Moore, Oklahoma last fall. One woman beheaded, another severely injured after their co-worker, Alton Nolen, was suspended and retaliated in the most vicious way. For those who witnessed this gruesome attack, their scars will never heal. Mark Vaughan, an executive with the company, who also happens to be a reserve sheriff's deputy, stopped the attacker with the only thing that could have stopped him, his firearm, and saved one of his employees, Tracy Johnson, and probably several others. Mark is being hailed as a true hero, as he so well deserves, and has also been named the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. The FBI, though, still refuses to call this heinous crime homegrown terrorism. But in this exclusive interview, Mark Vaughan told me there's no doubt this suspect had a frightening obsession with the Islamic group ISIS. Take a look.
There is not a single day that goes by that I don't think about the incident, that I don't run those images through my mind. Terrorism is here.
Shut the door. We have someone attacking someone in the building. I was just informed.
I immediately exited my office and I went down to my personal vehicle where I keep an AR-15 rifle. I donned a vest that said County Sheriff on it and ran about the 130 yards to the customer service area. It was a bad scene. Many people were exiting the building. People were crying and screaming. It was a very chaotic situation.
We know that he's loose. He had stabbed someone in our customer service department.
Okay. I'm in the women's locker room and I hear screaming, and that was the worst scream I've ever heard in my life. And it was Colleen. I didn't know she'd been beheaded. She's a grandma, she's a wife, she's a mother, and she's not here.
He came across Mrs. Hufford and attacked her from behind, ultimately killing her and beheading her. He then saw Mrs. Johnson, who had complained on him earlier that day. He was called in and suspended. He then went home, retrieved a knife, and returned to Vaughan Foods to get revenge on certain people that he felt responsible.
Others who were right there at the time of the initial attack were kicking, hitting, throwing chairs, books, and they were unable to stop him. He was determined, and he chased several folks off with a knife.
Lock that door.
You can.
Yeah, we're trying.
When I first saw him, it's just pure evil. His eyes looked like they could just pop out of his head. I see this knife, bloody knife in his hand, and I just froze. And he ran after me, and the next thing you know, he started attacking me. I started slicing my neck. I fought him. I'm a little fighter. I fought him. And he was 10 times bigger than me.
When I first arrived down that hallway, I could see the knife raised above his head and strokes with the knife, blows with the knife. I yelled at him to stop, and he did. He took a few steps toward me and then disappeared back around another hallway. I proceeded after him. This was also a time of shift change, so it was a time of a lot of activity anyway. Suddenly, he reappeared, running at me and others near me at full speed, with the knife still in hand, blood on his arm and on the knife.
And that's a gunshot. We heard 3.
I yelled a couple of times for him to stop, and he did not. And just at about 12 to 15 feet from me, I fired 3 rounds, and he collapsed to the floor, the knife still in his hand. I stopped the threat.
Mr. Vaughan, he saved my life. And I thank God for him every day. You know, I say that's my hero. He's an inspiration to me. If he wouldn't have been there, I'd probably not be here today. And no one would have probably killed some other people also.
It could have gotten a lot worse. This guy definitely was not going to stop until he was shot.
Well, I'm extremely proud of Mark. Mark went to work that morning as the chief operating officer of Vaughan Foods, and he went home that night as a hero. He saved lives because of his dedication and his training.
I do not view myself as a hero at all. I did what I had to do to protect the folks that worked for me, to stop this atrocity. But I have no doubt that Tracy Johnson would likely be dead today, as well as others he was targeting. He would not have quit, and had a firearm not been involved here by someone who was trained to use it, the consequences, though bad enough, would have been much greater. My involvement was a very thin slice of time, less than 3 minutes. But afterwards, it really hit home the heinous nature of this crime. We have some people that are not back to work. Many are still in counseling, very understandably.
I will not be returning to work there either. I have flashbacks of what happened. I still have a really rough time.
It must have been sheer terror, but it's one thing to go through the training. It's another thing to have to put it into action when every second counts.
The stories you hear about tunnel vision are true. I mean, everything for me shut down except my focus on that individual. I have gone through scenarios in my mind, but if there's no thinking or no opening textbooks, my training took over.
And to this day, there's still a debate. Do you call what happened here workplace violence, or do you call it homegrown terrorism?
It seems to be an isolated incident being triggered by his having been suspended earlier in that day.
It certainly was workplace violence, there's no question. I don't believe there's any question that this individual was influenced to a great degree by the happenings of ISIS and ISIL and what's going on in the Middle East.
He was using some Arabic terms during the attacks, and certainly that's one of the many reasons why the FBI is involved.
He was shouting something moments before I took the action I took.
After conducting interviews with co-workers of Nolen, information was obtained that he recently tried to convert some of his co-workers to the Muslim religion.
Obviously, there was some sort of infatuation with beheading. That's obvious from the Facebook post.
Terrorism. He had 3 people on his agenda. He wanted to behead them. That's all I can say is he's pure evil.
I believe there's a lone wolf attack aspect to this. I believe that he did hear the call of jihad and chose to, in this way, carry it out here.
What I found interesting is that the FBI refuses to call it terrorism because they said it didn't meet its definition. And part of that definition is intimidation of a civilian community. What more intimidation do you need?
The heinous and barbaric nature of this attack, I think, put everyone on their heels. I don't think the population of this country is convinced. They know the basis behind this attack.
Don't want to call the terrorism what it is? They're not fooling anybody. Most workers absolutely cannot count on their employer to protect them. They're kidding themselves.
The employees are asking the employers, what are you going to do different?
Current ownership of Vaughan Foods does not allow during working hours. Guns are not allowed. There's no restriction to them being in personal vehicles. They do allow armed security, though on the date of the incident, there was no armed security on site. When I owned the company, I allowed concealed carry holders to carry in the facility and to keep firearms in their car. My opinion is a gun-free zone just simply makes it harder for the rest of us to protect ourselves.
Do you know workers here who, after what happened, decided to go out and learn how to use a firearm?
Yes, there are several here, and some involved directly in this event that have since received their concealed carry permit, and I know are practicing. It's worth every penny.
What's the message you want other companies to take from what happened here?
Vigilance, preparedness. You cannot take the attitude they're not going to happen to you or into your workplace. We need to know they will happen with more frequency moving forward. And so I believe that firearms should be part of that strategy by qualified and trained individuals. And to have those people allowed to have firearms in the building, have access to firearms. We cannot rely on law enforcement to be right there at the instant they're needed. That's not reality.
You had an AR-15, and you know the stigma that's attached to that AR-15. What good is a ban?
When you're faced with the violence that our team here and I was faced on that day, it's not about a ban on a certain thing. It's about that innate responsibility we have to protect those around us and to protect ourselves. And anything that restricts that is going against that thing that we hold most dear.
What was your reaction when you found out that you were going to get the award from the NRA Law Enforcement Officer of the Year?
Law enforcement always seemed to call my name, so it was quite a big deal and quite an honor.
It gives me goosebumps because he'll sit there and say he doesn't deserve it. Yeah, he does. Because he's the one that did what he did for us. He's a very caring person. Doesn't think of it just himself, he thinks of others before he thinks of himself.
I heard from several reserve commanders and agencies throughout the country were saying, hey, thanks for being there for us. Thank you for putting a good spin on a reserve program, because reserve officers are a non-paid position. However, we have arrest powers, all the things that go along with a law enforcement officer. So the services to the citizens would certainly be diminished if there were not an active reserve force at play here.
As you said, the trial is coming up.
The jury will need to decide the fate of Alton Nolen, but let's hope the awareness and the violence of this incident does set home. We still live in the greatest country in the world. I'm proud very much to be American, but we need to know it's going to be part of how we lead our daily lives moving forward. And from what I know of the case, a conviction is what I'm expecting.
The DA's, Greg Mashburn, asked family permission for the death penalty, and they all said yes. He deserves to get the death penalty put on him. I have to speak for Colleen because Colleen can't speak. I want her to be able to rest in her grave.
And certainly justice, I believe, will be served.